I said, the house had been open for 3 years, so a lot of mold had accumulated. So before we could start the rebuild process, we needed to make sure everything was out. So we went through, even that was a vetting process, and everyone, it's interesting, the more I got into this, the more people have their methods of how to do things, and they don't always mesh. So it's really important to establish early on who are the experts that you're going to, and make sure that everyone on the team agrees and respects those experts. Kind of like the Pharos, the Green Guard, the MSDS. Okay, these are the resources that we're going to go to. Even some books. There were a couple books throughout this process. Paula's book.
Paula Baker-Laporte has a book called Prescriptions for a Healthy Home.
It's great.
It actually has multiple chemicals.
I think it was like at my bed for the entire year. I read that thing daily. You know, so it was establishing these resources early on that everyone could go to and everyone get the same copy. It was even different versions of the book. We had to make sure we had the same version because we were like referencing page numbers. I found that to be a really helpful thing, and then that way we're all going to the same resource and we're respecting the same opinion. We finally were able to mitigate our mold through grinding, through wiping down with soap water, through HEPA vacuuming, and repeating that process a couple times. Only then, once we got the clean bill of health in the house, could we then start adding new material back into the house. So that was a very, very important process. And we took it very seriously because we did not want to end up with a project that the owner thought that we missed a step. And then
And one of the things to know about mold and mildew is that even after you've cleaned it, there will still be spores there for a while.
Yeah.
So you can't just assume, if you can't see it, that it's not there.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some shaking of heads, which is great.
So how do you make sure it's clean?
Again, you just have to make sure it's dried out, and you can have someone come in and actually do an assessment, which is what we've done.
Exactly. But even that, you have to be careful, because some people will say they're going to test it. It's how they test it. And again, if everyone's on board with that. This is just a funny, this is the HEPA vac that was set up when we got there, that was trying to clean the house, and then we obviously had to be masked because it was a pretty toxic environment when we first got there. A few interesting things and some things that I learned as leading this team. When you start the process of vetting material, my advice is to create a list of, I treat things like this as a watercolor. So start the base layer and create this list of, here are all the materials that are going to go into this house. It doesn't need to get specific, like, okay, we're going to have 5 different kinds of tile. We're just going to have tile. Okay, so just start this kind of basic layer of lists of materials, and then really establish a timeline. And so that's what we did on this, because it can be an incredible amount of information, and it can be overwhelming for everyone. And so then you knock through it, kind of piece by piece. Okay, we're starting with the core shell. Well, the first thing we have to do is we've got to pour a foundation. All right, so let's make sure we have Lafarge concrete with no fly ash additive. Okay, well, that was a whole vetting process, getting to what concrete we wanted to even put in. And so if you piece this into chunks, then that way it seems doable, and people can just focus on one thing instead of getting overwhelmed by all the information.
What Sarah did that was really good is the client had this tendency to want to ramble, and so we'd be looking specifically at just the foundation or just the insulation and the vapor barrier. And then all of a sudden she's talking about the drywall and the mud and the tape, and we're like, no, we got to focus just on this.
Let's get the wall up, and then we can figure out.
And then from there we can layer on top. So
exactly.
It's like really going through and dissecting every single part of the wall structure, floor structure, and then eventually the finishes.
Enforcing the yes, and making sure you have that approval, because a lot of times you would get a kind of yes without going, no, I'm on board with this. This is what I'm feeling comfortable with.
And back to the thing about having one point of contact, what would happen is that I would get a call from the client after all the information was out, and then the contractor would, and then Sarah would, and all 3 conversations were different. So Scott's nodding his head. So having that point of contact for that ultimate decision is so important, I think, even more so on a job of this nature.
Yeah, and then getting it down on an email and getting everyone to respond to it was a very valuable thing. These are just some process shots that we're going to be going through. So again, starting with the foundation, making sure everyone's on board with the concrete. Then came the waterproofing. Okay, we were even vetting the waterproofing, even though you think this is something that's maybe outside of the foundation and not in the house. This was a really important decision. In the city of Aspen, when you are remodeling, you have to keep 60% of your exterior walls and roof. Otherwise, there is a big implication, and it goes into it's basically a tear down. And there's big financial obligations with that. So we had to keep 60% of our exterior core and shell, some of which we weren't very comfortable with. So that's when you have to start making decisions. And luckily we had a structure that had some heavy timber beams with it that we could keep, that had been there 50 years and that were fine. There was no issue with them, and so we were able to make some decisions. But every window had to go, and we even had some homosew sheathing on the house that some of it had to remain because we couldn't get rid of it because it's considered part of our walls. I was sitting down with the head of community development explaining our situation, and there was really no budge with it. It didn't matter. So it's understanding those, and don't get yourself into a predicament if you're trying to make those changes. Again, just more construction shots. Some interesting things that I learned along the way. Windows. It came time to pick our windows, and there are a couple custom window manufacturers out there. Obviously, they come at a premium. This was the type of house that we did not want to do a custom window with. In speaking with window manufacturers, they have pieces and parts in their factory that are dipped to keep them from molding, or that they have a larger shelf life. I had no clue. You don't even know these things, and you're starting to talk with them. And so it's like it's digging deep. It's getting certifications. It's making sure that you're getting the best possible thing that's out there. It may not be perfect, and that was one thing that the client left me a voicemail last night and stressed. You're not always going to find the perfect solution. It's finding the best of what's out there. So you can really kind of beat yourself up
and it's stressful.
It is
frankly,
stressful
from a consultant standpoint, because the health of this person is in your hands. So it really was a team effort to make that happen.
Absolutely, and one of the things Annette talked a lot about these resources and kind of the science behind it. Ultimately, every decision was pretty much made on this project by touch and feel. So we would narrow down the products, and then we would get physical samples. And we would
that was the best way to
touch them, we would smell them. We use Certainty. I don't know if any of you guys in this room know Certainty. So we use Certainty as the vapor barrier on this project. It works in this environment. It doesn't work in Florida. But in this environment, it was the right thing to do. Well, how do you apply it? All of a sudden, we're vetting tape, figuring out how to apply the Certainty on the wall. It wasn't this simple, great, we finally decided on this. Then it's like, oh my God, now we had to tape. So ultimately, we figured out a couple of sources, and then we literally just smelled it and got
and really have the client take it home, and if she's brave enough or he's brave enough to put it by their bedside. That's what some of my other clients have done. And if they can sleep with it overnight and wake up without headache, nausea, irritation, more than likely it will serve its need.
Absolutely. And in doing those smell tests, it was really important. Laura in our office was amazing. We'd go over to the client's house and paint things. It was, we'd always be painting samples on glass or on aluminum foil, because even if you're doing samples on wood, you don't know where that wood is coming from, or we hadn't vetted our wood yet. So there are definitely methods on how you can get decisions, and ultimately that's what you need, and that's what my role was on the project, to make sure that the design was true and that we were happy with that, but then that also we could have the right materials going in. Paint was a really big one, and we ultimately ended up with our drywall, which another interesting fact that I learned is you cannot not buy Type X drywall. So we did not want a fire retardant drywall, so this was a huge vetting process, and then we basically found out that no one makes a non-Type X drywall anymore. Everything has fire retardant in it. So that was one of those things where you're like, you can't reinvent drywall. It's like one of those things you just got to make that decision and go with it. But we could affect the mud, and we went with a Merco non-quick dry. That was a decision that was made knowing that it was going to add 3 weeks to our schedule and some cost. But it was something that the right decision to make in this application. And then the paint, we did a lot of sniff tests with our paint. We ended up with AFM paint, but then it came time we had these great exposed steel stair. We're, oh great, we have our paint, and then we painted and it started corroding the steel. So again, it was not the right thing. It was great for our drywall, but not right for our steel. So there's just, you got to make sure it's working in every application. So that was an interesting thing to do. one thing that's really important to our firm, we live in Colorado, we have amazing light, so daylighting is always really important in our projects, and that was a goal of this project. We added a loft so that there could be a flexible room for grandchildren sleeping and an extra bathroom. And what's amazing about this house is that you can be in it all day long until the sun sets and not turn on any artificial lighting. And that became really important, even with the lower level halfway underground. So there's a lot of things that you can do that are not materials. It's just creating a healthy home in other ways. So it's not always about what's being applied. It's also the sensibility and the feeling of the space.
And one of the things that we haven't touched on yet are electromagnetic fields and how those affect clients. And I know that this particular client did have sensitivity to that. There wasn't as much of an issue here because you were rewiring most of the house.
Right, but for instance, we didn't run any wire behind bed walls.
Right.
So we made sure everything was terminated, so no wires crossed. We had an all-off switch in every closet, in every bedroom, so that all power could be turned off individually. And we located the electrical panel in the garage outside of the house, which was not connected to the house. So little things like that made a big difference.
And they knew exactly which appliances they were because they vetted them themselves because of the EMF issues. So that's definitely, some people have that, some people don't. But like Sarah said earlier, the truth is we're all affected by them, just some of us worse than others.
Yeah, the other thing that was difficult in this project that I would highly recommend is understand the thresholds that people have, because we were having a hard time with this. It was everything. It was
hard, yeah.
It was everything. So if you can understand, well, this is what I'm sensitive to, it really kind of helps guide that process. Then you can automatically just get some things out of the way and be focused. But strong leadership is critical, because you can get really bogged down and there's a lot of greenwashing or I don't know, sensitivity washing, stuff out there. So you have to be really strong. You have to go through and you have to be conscious of what you're reading and making sure that everything is valid.
So that's the house in and of itself. So what we're going to go through now are some of the resources, then leave some time at the end for some Q&A.